Today, we're taking a deep psychological journey, and we're going to tackle one of the darkest questions out there. What really makes a killer?
So let's just jump right in. It's so easy to look at a killer and just label them a monster, right? Something evil, something other. But what if it's not that simple? What if monsters aren't born? What if they're made? To really wrap our heads around this, psychology kind of flips the script. It moves past that simple good versus evil judgment. The real question for a psychologist isn't what is evil, it's what happened here. It's all about tracing the path back, not just staring at the horrible end result. Okay, so let's get on the same page with the definition. A serial killer isn't just someone who kills more than once. The key, and this is absolutely crucial, is the why. This isn't about a split second of rage. It's driven by this deep, gnawing psychological need for power and for control. Now, here's a huge misconception we need to clear up. We throw around words like psychopath and insane like they're the same thing. They're not, at all. Most psychopaths are perfectly aware of reality. They know what's right and wrong. They understand the law. What's missing is on the inside. There's no guilt, no empathy. It's just this profound, echoing, emotional emptiness. So where does that emptiness come from? Well, it often has a starting point, and to find it, we've got to go way back. To understand the adult, we first have to look at the child. When psychologists dig into the backgrounds of serial killers, a pattern emerges that is just devastating. And it shows up with shocking consistency. We're talking about severe, ongoing childhood trauma. Things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, being completely neglected emotionally, abandonment, and just growing up in a home that's filled with violence. And this quote it nails the worldview that an environment like that creates. I mean, can you imagine being a kid, and this is the lesson you learn day in and day out? The world is a dangerous place. The people who are supposed to protect you are the ones hurting you. Love itself is a lie? That becomes the very foundation of how you see everything. And you know, this goes so much deeper than just emotional scars. This kind of constant trauma can literally rewire a developing brain. It physically changes the architecture, all as a desperate attempt to just survive. Think about it like this. A healthy kid learns a really simple, beautiful equation. Love equals safety. But for a traumatized child, that equation gets completely scrambled. It becomes love equals pain. So as they get older, things like control and power become these twisted replacements for the connection and love they never got. I mean, how does a little kid's mind even handle that much pain? It follows this tragic path. First, you have the constant trauma. So then, to survive, the brain just shuts down the emotions. It creates this deep, deep numbness inside. But that emptiness is its own kind of torture, which leads to this desperate need to do something, anything, no matter how extreme, just to feel alive. Now, it's important to say this isn't only about a person's environment. Some studies suggest there might be pre-existing vulnerabilities, maybe in parts of the brain that handle impulse control. That alone doesn't create a killer. But when you take that vulnerability and you flood it with severe trauma, well, the risk just skyrockets. It's like a perfect storm. So now you have this dangerous cocktail, a history of trauma, that deep emotional numbness, and a desperate craving for control. So where does all that go? Often, it starts inside, in a fantasy world built around power, a fantasy that can tragically spill over into reality. Think about those core feelings of a child: powerless, ignored, abused, isolated. And now look at the killer's motivation. It is a direct, horrifying mirror image of that childhood experience. The violence becomes a twisted way to finally seize power, to have absolute control, and, in their broken mind, to finally scream to the world, "I exist." That fantasy world is an escape, a place to feel powerful. But for some, a terrifying line gets crossed. The fantasy stops being a comfort and starts becoming a blueprint. That urge to make it real just becomes too much to handle. Okay, and now we get to what is maybe the most critical part of this whole discussion. Because understanding this path is one thing, but it is never, ever an excuse. This next part is all about how we can break this awful cycle. And here is a fact, a number, that is so important to remember. Over 99% of people who go through the most horrific trauma do not become killers. A traumatic past is not a life sentence. In fact, the vast majority of survivors grow up to be incredibly resilient, empathetic people. So what's the difference? What's the secret sauce that breaks the cycle?
While the research points to a few key things, sometimes it's as simple and as profound as having just one stable, caring adult in a child's life. It's about getting emotional support, having access to therapy, and that basic human need to just feel seen and understood. We also have to be really honest about this topic. You know, Hollywood and movies love to paint this picture of the brilliant, mysterious mastermind. But the reality, it's nothing like that. There is zero glamour here. The reality is just one of profound emptiness and catastrophic psychological damage. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Why does it matter? Well, because when we understand this pathway, it gives us a roadmap for prevention. Our responsibility as a society becomes pretty clear. We have to protect children, we have to support mental health, and we have to work to stop violence before it even starts. And this quote just perfectly captures the whole point. We don't study this kind of darkness because it's fascinating in some morbid way. We study it to find the light switches. The goal is always, always prevention. And that leaves us all with one final and really important question to think about. If we know that the seeds of this kind of violence are so often planted in childhood pain, then what is our shared responsibility to care for the kids in our communities, right here, right now? Something to reflect on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.